Okay, welcome everyone. This is a special meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee's Districts and Council Operations Subcommittee focused on onboarding. Special meetings are just those outside of our regular meeting cadence, and attendance is optional for GTAC members. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, and we'll be here from 4 to 5 p.m. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition. Our co-chair, Jose, is going to facilitate today's meeting. Next slide, please. I'm going to just go over some meeting logistics before we get started. This is a virtual meeting. It's being live streamed on YouTube. A copy of the recording will be posted on the city's website under past meetings and events. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, you can click on the CC button on the bottom of your screen. For committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone so that those in attendance can view the chat. And please remember that the chat is part of the public meeting record. For any community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A feature available. You can submit questions or comments throughout the meeting using the Q&A feature. We don't always live answer questions if we get them, but we do read them and they also become part of the public meeting record. At today's meeting, we're not taking verbal public comment, but folks can give us public comment at any time by calling 311, by emailing us at transition@portlandoregon.gov, or by going to the transition website and filling out the online public comment form. If you want to give verbal public comment to the full Government Transition Advisory Committee, you can sign up to do so at their next meeting on June 11th. Next slide, please, and I'll turn it over to Jose to introduce the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Today's agenda will include, as always, subcommittee business. Then we'll have some city updates, progress on the GTAC recommendations and the proposed next steps, as well as the onboarding timeline and deliverables. Before we adjourn, as always, we'll go over the next steps. Next slide, please. Committee business. This is a special meeting and attendance is optional. So we didn't ask anyone for excused absences. Thank you for all of you that came today. How many are 1, 2, 3, 5? There is 5 of us. Nope, there's only one. Nope, yeah, there is 5 of us. So we could approve the meeting summary, the April 23rd meeting summary. Does anyone have any proposed revisions to the April 23rd meeting summary? Seeing no revision, do we have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Thanks, Joe. Do we have a second? Amy seconds. Thanks, Amy. I saw your hand. Any objections? Seeing none, I will consider it approved. Perfect. Next slide, please. And now to go over the working agreements. As always, we go over these, not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of anyone who may be watching this. The working agreements state as follows. In discussions, challenge ideas rather than individuals, offer constructive suggestions, approach different opinions with curiosity, seek to understand, keep the needs and concerns of the local community and the larger region at the forefront of the work, arrive on time and prepared to the best of your ability, and let the group know if you're unable to attend a meeting. The co-chairs will aim to incorporate tools for breathers, keep multitasking to a minimum, keep focus on the objectives of the meetings, utilize co-chairs to know additional topics for discussion by submitting topics in writing via email. Next slide, please. Honor the decisions of the group, contribute to the overall success of the group by finding ways to participate that best meets your needs, step up and step back, collectively work to ensure that every member who wants to be heard is heard, embrace conflict and work with your fellow committee members and staff to find a way to give each other feedback. And the co-chairs will aim to incorporate various feedback tools and use I statement. Next slide, please. Based on the last onboarding meeting, GTAC members asked staff to share 2 updates at this meeting. One on communicating onboarding plans to candidates and one on internal city communication and support for the onboarding work. Tate White is with us today and can provide updates. Tate?
Thank you, Jose. Hi, everyone. For anyone watching, my name is Tate White. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a strategic projects manager with the transition team, working on managing the onboarding planning. And yeah, so in terms of sharing onboarding information with candidates, I'm actually presenting at the first of this round of candidate learning sessions tomorrow. And I'm including information about sort of general timing of the onboarding, at least what we're anticipating. So that will be part of the presentation. Tomorrow is the virtual one. And then I think we have 2 in-person ones, one next Tuesday and one next Saturday. Don't quote me on that. I know that's information that's available probably on the city elections office site. And so, yeah, I made sure to update that presentation because we had our first round of candidate learning sessions hosted by the city elections office back in January, I believe. And I talked about roles and responsibilities, but I completely updated this presentation because there's more information to share and because the videos from January are still available. So people can go back to those to see them. So trying to really emphasize providing candidates information, but also trying to provide access to all interested candidates too. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, I have one. I think this is not exactly on target, though. Are candidates coming? I would certainly hope that every single candidate takes advantage of every single opportunity to learn what they can. Is that what you're observing?
I mean, it's hard to judge that fairly. I think last time we saw a good deal of candidates attend the virtual session, or at least I saw names that I recognized. I think it's hard to say who's an interested candidate and who's like really going to be a candidate as well. So you don't know where to draw that line. There might also be staff members helping them on campaigns, attending on their behalf. It's hard to say, especially since we're providing the recordings that are available for them to watch. So even if they're not attending, hopefully they're actually watching those recordings. So that's my sort of anecdotal answer. Okay. If there aren't any more questions, for the other update, I know I spoke with Shoshana. I think this was in reference to a candidate forum that North Star Civic put on. So it wasn't a city hosted forum, but they invited Mike Jordan there to be a guest on a broader panel. And so he spoke to kind of Portland specific plans and different things. I think he made a comment about like a 10-day city university. And so there was a concern that that wasn't specifically anything you had heard from me. And so I followed up on that to see if there was anything behind that that I wasn't aware of, which there wasn't. I think it was just an example of, you know, Mike's a very busy man and is kind of speaking off the cuff and speaking in a more sort of visionary language. And so it wasn't in reference to anything beyond planning that we're doing as a team or anything that we're sharing with you. I do think it's ironic though. I think you can see in some of the outline materials I've given you, I think ultimately the work in December is going to add up to roughly 10 days. So it's not completely off point in terms of that. So we can continue to talk about that. But I mean, and Julia might also, I don't know if Julia had a different conversation, but, we definitely shared that there was, some concern about that being said and maybe mismatching. So that information has been shared. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Hopefully that's like most of the talking I'm doing today. I'm interested in hearing you all talk.
Thank you so much, Tate. And if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to send them. I'm sure Tate will be happy to answer them. Next slide, please. As a reminder, in March, GTAC approved a set of onboarding recommendations. Last week, staff provided an update on the recommendations and the proposed next steps. We aren't going to present the update to you again, but I've asked Tate to briefly introduce the progress and the next steps document, and we'll open it up for discussion. So Tate, you're on again.
Oh, I don't think I'm prepared for this, but I can look at it. Okay.
You don't take, you don't have to, don't present it. Folks can read it ahead of time. Just like tell us what it is. I just put a link to so that folks are kind of oriented to the document.
Perfect. And I do have it up so I can speak to it. I'm sorry, I was in council like all morning, mostly waiting for my agenda item. It went really long, but even just that has me a little brain foggy. So, okay. Oh, this was great. So I made a chart and I'd been looking at your recommendations verbatim, but I sort of pulled out the meatiest parts of them just for the sake of being able to look at them all together. And so Julia shared my very sort of not anything special graphically chart that I was using to just think about it all. And so I think it starts with sort of you were responding to recommendations we had already shared, and you provided some additional recommendations, and there were about 6 total, and they're all great recommendations. And so I talked about, how we're already responding to some of those and thinking about those through our work planning and different things. But then I also saw it as an opportunity to identify, where I think GTAC could really contribute, because you have a recommendation about how you see yourself as a partner. And so for this first sort of group of additional recommendations for early onboarding, that how serving an elective office in Oregon, how that differs from other leadership roles, I really thought that might be a great piece for any interested GTAC members to, research, like develop or coordinate materials on. So I'd put it to this group, like, is that something you'd be interested in working on or following up on? Anything like that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. We can continue our conversation.
I just want to say thank you for giving us a job. That's all we've been. We're just some people with a lot of opinions and time on our hands to write onboarding material.
What?
Let us do research for you.
Yeah.
That's great. Like, I would love it, because I'm like, oh, I want to do all these things too, but I'm like, I don't, it's also great to have your expertise that's like separate and diverse from our own expertise. Yeah, I think I was like, Julia, can I give GTAC stuff to do? Is that allowed? But obviously it's like only if you're interested, but I think that would be a great opportunity. So that's just like the first of other things on this sheet. But before I move on to the next recommendation, I'll just say, to cover all of them, guidelines for working with city staff. Yes, that's a great point. It's something we're thinking about integrating. And I will say, we have a new communications team member, Alyssa, who's supporting the onboarding work. She's fabulous, and she's thinking about how to integrate a lot of what we're doing into our own intranet site. And I think that's going to be used a lot by staff, especially that are trying to support elected officials. So just an add-on thing that's in the works. Guidelines for working with members of the public. That is something that is actually part of the draft rules and procedures document that's going through internal reviews right now, and something we'll be sharing with you. It's something that was seen in those types of documents for other cities, and it seemed like a good place to touch on it there. It's going to be more for elected officials as the audience and how they work with staff. We might have to think about separate avenues to really help staff understand how they now interact or don't interact with elected officials. And the idea of guidelines for being an effective team member, I think that's going to be a more really important, but maybe a more delicate consideration that we're continuing to sort of explore what are the right options for that. And then policy governance, that's actually something that I think Amanda Mujeres, I hope I'm saying her name right, is doing some really interesting scoping on. They have such a great background with sort of policy development, also with like how you advocate for policy and get policy passed. And they're really working on sort of modules to help elected officials really understand the full continuum of that sort of policy process. And so that's great because that's work happening outside of the city, but something that we can help connect the new elected officials to and like advertise. So I hope I'm not oversharing or stating this great work that she's doing. But it's really interesting and just an example of us being aware of what our external partners are doing and making sure and like seeing that as an opportunity that we can advertise those opportunities to elected officials, and it can't just be city staff providing information on that.
So, Tate, could you just sort of give us an idea of what you're thinking of as external partners? Amanda, Sightline, I think you mentioned PSU last time.
Yeah, so one again, and I'm pausing because I don't know if I got Amanda's permission to share that information. But I know that Amanda is talking to PSU because it's really great to have sort of just a partner like that's an institution like that and a real educational institution, because I think it would be a great resource for anyone, not even just elected officials in Portland. And then I'll keep going, but feel free to interrupt me. So the council reference manual, which we're calling sort of a briefing booklet, because that's sort of what our communications colleagues have historically referred to it as. And also, I think it's important to identify the importance that the materials try to be brief so that we are giving them information effectively without it being a full fire hose that they can't they can't take anything in. But we really started on really developing what's our approach to this, making sure we are getting concise, important materials from all the different bureaus and service areas. And our unified comms team has done some great briefing booklets for the past two elected transitions and new electeds. Of course, it will be different this time, but we're working with them to, involve them, learn from them, have them involved. The new team member, Alyssa, that I referenced early on, is also doing great work with them to connect all of that. And we have a lot of meetings, like focus meetings set up with folks to really own in on like what this needs to look like and starting to develop that content. Pausing. Feel free to interrupt me with questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions or any comments or discussion, now would be the time to pipe in before we move on to, after this, we'll be talking about timeline for onboarding, which is Tate as well.
Sorry,
Juliet?
Jose. I took your job by calling.
Yeah, I just have a couple of general questions. I'm wondering if any of this content already exists somewhere, and so that we could have a starting place and not have to do everything from scratch. And I am curious about how you determine when to assign work to an external partner or to, I think it says consultant or something somewhere in here. And then I have another question, but it's farther down, so I can hold off on that one.
So your first question about base materials, was that about the briefing booklet or is that about the
No, I was looking
GTAC
more at
request?
the modules on policy development and governance, and I was looking at I guess roles and responsibilities. I was thinking more of the modules.
So the modules, that's something that someone else is working on to develop. So that's not something I'm specifically asking GTAC to develop.
Right, I'm just asking in general.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't know. I think one thing that this partner has identified is that this is maybe something that's missing that would be extremely valuable for candidates as they start moving into being decision makers and elected officials and policy developers.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And what was your next question?
I'll just wait because it's in a section that you haven't gotten to.
Okay. Destiny.
Thank you. I had a question. Oh, sorry. Okay. I had a question it's referenced a couple of times about council getting shared goal setting process, developing roadmaps, doing trainings as a team, and it says multiple options to address this, including potentially bringing in a third party facilitator. I'm wondering if there's any ideas of what that is, what type of activities you're hoping to do, what's the goal setting, because those are big ideas with that just placed there. And I definitely want to see this council doing team building in a new government early on.
Yeah, no, it's hugely important. And I'm saying less about it just because we don't know. And I don't want to sort of get out ahead of that because it's so important. I think we've sort of been waiting for the budget, which is now part of the approved budget, but not yet the adopted budget. So we're also sort of waiting to see that kind of finalized so we know what fully we can do. There's still sort of a desire to at least for what the city budget is working on, to sort of focus on internal resources and building up internal resources, because we do have some great facilitators at the city. And so it's sort of kind of a continued conversation where we need to figure out what exactly that should look like and who's the right person to give that, if that makes sense. It's not a very helpful answer. I'm sorry, Destiny.
No, it's okay. I would just love to see what ideas after the budget is approved are percolating to see what theme
Totally.
the team building is aligning with.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I have a great colleague who was really interested in that piece of the work. And so I was run with it. And I think they've gotten overloaded with other things. And so need to bring them back in and see kind of what they've thought about as that has progressed. But yeah, we can definitely talk about them more. But that's also something, this came out, what you're quoting is really GTAC's recommendation. So I also welcome you to continue to share your ideas about that, your thoughts about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amy.
Well, first, appreciate so much just work and also the timeline that you included. I've been thinking a lot about the change management, the overall city change management. And I'm wondering if those are integrated, because I know they were working with a consultant to do the broader change management. So is this not the perfect interface to be here's our new culture? Is that part of the vision or?
Yeah, that is one of the options we're exploring. As and I've had this conversation with Jamie and Jennifer to be like, and we're just not sure yet, right? We need to figure out, because we're still getting familiar with those sort of consultants and facilitators as well. And I've taken some of their courses and they're great, but we need to make sure, like, is that the right fit? And figuring it out. But that is one of those options.
Yeah,
for sure.
because surely aren't they already doing stuff for the larger city organization in general? That's like,
yeah, and like they're doing change management trainings for management across the organization, and so I've done that work as well. And so it could be like, oh, they're developing
this is
that.
what to expect or something like that for the.
Yeah, well, it's teaching. And I'm trying to recall it. It's teaching like sort of change management tactics and like skills and practices to managers to help employees and different things like that. And so that's why like maybe it's not the right fit for the elected officials, because like maybe their priority is not, you know, change management work. Like their priority is like, yes, it's change management, but it's like bringing in a new culture, and it's like this idea of team building and working together. And so that's why we're like, well, we have these, but like maybe that isn't the right fit. So
That makes total sense. No, it's just kind of an off the cuff thought, but definitely they need to be focused on building a legislature. Because that's going to be very difficult.
Totally. No, thank you for that. And yeah, I do think that if we were bringing in an external facilitator or trainer, I think the contracts would be small enough that we could do it quickly, so we have a little bit of time to figure out like what's exactly the right need here and who's the most appropriate person. Okay, I'm gonna keep talking, but feel free to stop me. The next recommendation I'm looking at this is this idea of like mayor, council, auditor, and staff roles, and creating a clear delineation of responsibilities and expectations and accountability, which I totally hear that. I think where I get, you know, we're trying to be really clear about what roles and responsibilities are, but also trying to be respectful of like electeds coming in and figuring out like how they want to approach their kind of charter defined authorities and roles and responsibilities. And so I think this is one of those areas that I would welcome GTAC to develop recommendations, because it might not be, you know, as city staff, we can talk about, you know, how we've interpreted the charter and what our expectations are and what we've learned from best practices research, but this might be an area where GTAC would be a great contributor.
I agree, and I think that that's a really appropriate thing for us to work on.
Oh yeah, I'm so happy to hear that.
It also may be too late to work those into our you know, public input during the summer, but seems to me that that sense of council individual roles and responsibilities would be a really good thing to discuss in public forum as well.
Yeah, that does sound great.
And
Julia.
partly because I think there's going to be a lot of real misunderstanding. You know, when somebody calls their council member, they expect their council member to get on the phone and call that person that I saw on my street and tell them to stop. And that's not their responsibility.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Juliet, go ahead.
I just wonder about the timing of GTAC's role. So would we be waiting to see what those recommendations are and then augmenting them, or doing our own thing in parallel and then comparing them?
Which recommendations are you referring to?
The recommendations about the mayor, council, auditor, staff roles and responsibilities, et cetera.
Well, I mean, I don't think as a city, like we're gonna be integrating that into the curriculum. Like this is, you know, these are what the charter changes say, and that's what it means for your roles and responsibilities. And so, but it's gonna be, I mean, I don't want to say it's going to be basic, but it's going to be very much like, you know, you are a legislative focused council. You're going to be more focused on setting policy and connecting with community. And like, that's those are your new roles and responsibilities, but getting into kind of like the details and community expectations of that, I think that's where GTAC could come in. And I think the timing of that is flexible, right? Like, I think the city is going to be focused on outlining, like, you know, kind of black and white rules and parameters and things like that. And then maybe I can't remember what exactly GTAC is planning, but I think you're like submitting a report of recommendations or whatever, and this could be rolled up into that, or you could do it in sort of the first few months of their terms, which, because I think you meet going into like sort of mid 2025. Someone correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, so we'd have kind of a distinct and separate role in this process that would
I
complement.
think so. Complementary. Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
Well, that's also to give you like the freedom too, to like use your judgment on what you think is best based on what you want to recommend. All right, so then I'm moving on to the recommendation about council engaging in a goal setting process. I know Juanita's not here, but I think this is very close to her heart, and it's great, developing the roadmap and different things that Destiny already referenced, and this idea that I have a little bit of a generic response to this right now about how multiple options are being explored, just because we don't know yet, because this could look like so many different things and it's really important. And so sort of figuring out what our objectives are for that process and what it exactly should look like is really what will drive that. But again, I'd reiterate, if you, through your research and thinking about this, if you have more ideas about what you think that should look like, please share them with us.
And I will say, it's good that we're going over these recommendations. We have time set aside to go over the timelines and deliverables, and just to, as the next part of our agenda. Anything we continue to go over is going to take time away from that. So just,
Yeah,
I'm okay with staying here, but just be aware.
No, thank you for that, Jose. I think that might be a shorter conversation, but yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, and with that, we can move on. And then there's the recommendation about GTAC as a partner in the process, which I think I'm acknowledging here by trying to identify, like, oh my gosh, it would be great to have GTAC think about this more and make recommendations. And I think we've covered that in most everything because we are having these meetings. And then the importance of the mayor and auditor being involved and how their roles relate to council and their participation being important. So we totally agree. They're going to be invited to pretty much most sessions, especially if it's appropriate. And then council members being heavily reliant on their aides, and important to really have a plan for their onboarding as well. And so we're trying to think a lot about that. And I referenced the work that Alyssa's doing and just making sure we have, materials and just resources for them specifically that are really useful to help them support the counselors. Oh, and we are going to finish. And then the last one is getting the right.
Tate,
Go ahead.
in the last meeting, talking about council staff, use the word tactical, or at least that's in the notes. So I think I know what I would mean if I use that word. Tell me what you have in mind, because I think that it really is important to do real tactical training with the one person per counselor that they're going to have as their dedicated staff.
Totally. Well, I think I borrowed that word from our internal group, probably. Thinking about different things like how the use the e-council software to submit legislative items into the process, like how they are how they use the city website to really update the counselor's website and be standard on their website, and like different standards and expectations for elected officials and how they use social media and different communication standards, and like, or different sort of methods and resources available to them to support constituent relations. I guess that's what I mean when I use tactical. Does that make sense? Do you think anything's missing?
Yeah, I think all of that, plus the fact that, starting on day one, they're going to really be in the trenches. Everybody is going to want to see every council member, and these staff people are really going to have to keep them grounded to reality, and what they can do and what they can't do. And so I think that their training in real nuts and bolts, practical hands-on stuff is going to be really important.
No, I appreciate that. And any materials you're familiar with that already exist to help with that, love to have
Okay.
those. If you want to share any, that will only help us.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. And so the last one here is getting the right presenters and facilitators, and sometimes that's staff, but some might be external to the city and be more appropriate. And so this is a key one where I know this group has a lot of expertise about this and probably a lot of great ideas. So would really love to hear your thoughts and suggestions about this. Yeah. So I think that wraps it up, but please feel free to ask more questions.
So I'm just assuming this is a small enough group that we don't need to, do our hands unless everyone wants to talk at the same time. Tate, I think so first of all, it's clear that you've done a lot of thinking and a lot of work, and I hope that you've been able to do that because your life is less stressful and not because you've been staying up 23 hours a day. Thank you, really appreciate it, and it gives me peace of mind to see that you've made so much progress. The first sort of big bubble here about the specific things that we suggested as examples of things that might be added to the list of topics that you gave us originally, I think is starting to go toward a sort of comprehensive kind of curriculum of, what are the headings that are going to be covered. And I hope as you develop that, you'll share it with us and invite our input.
Yes, I think you'll see that sort of information in the onboarding plan that I have completed a draft version of. It's not as complete as I thought it might be, but is going through internal review now and is something that I'll share in advance of our next meeting. And so you'll see information like that in there.
Great.
If there aren't any other questions, or if you come up with other questions, please feel free again to send them to Tate. But we'll move on to the next session. Next slide, please. The staff provided an overview of the onboarding timeline and deliverables. I believe it was last week. Again, we're not going to present you the exact update again, but we're going to go back to Tate so we could talk about the timeline deliverables. So take it away, Tate, again.
Thank you, Jose. Yeah, I realized I kept thinking that I had shared a lot of this information with you, but I'm like, I don't know if I ever wrote it down, or who knows anymore. There's so many conversations on this. I found it really useful to, as I was working on the onboarding plan, just think like, what are really the key milestones when we get to actual onboarding? And so, of course, November 5th is important as the election. And then we know it might take a couple weeks before we know all the results. And there's, potential for there to be some disputed results. And so I know I've talked to this group about why that being the reason why we're not really starting onboarding until December, just to give that time to have more clarity on who the newly elected officials are. And but we'll try to start in earnest at that time. Just because of how the dates fall in December, it's really at the start of that first week that the county will really start releasing the results that they are sure about. And that first week, because we want to do the first in-person day with everyone there on a Saturday, just to have that opportunity to have that sort of first orientation day. So because that first Saturday post those results being released is not till the 7th, we're going to use that week before as an opportunity to have some like hybrid sort of like benefit sessions that most people have, to really let people know like you're going to become a city employee and these are your this is what you can expect to like have. So it's kind of like, it sounds really basic, but it's something we heard from our current elected officials that would have been really useful. And so we're working with our colleagues in the Bureau of Human Resources to see how we can make that an option for them. It's also to sort of like address it, then have hybrid and recorded options, and then we don't have to take time away from that for the rest of the month. And so then we have kind of a more robust welcome orientation day on the 7th. And that's the day where it could be interesting to integrate some of these sort of really important potential like team building exercises and different things like that. Like, is that the day that some of those things happen? Maybe that could be useful. My colleague who's been working on sort of like a potential overview of this day, it sort of is turning into like an overview of all the things we're going to be dig into deeper later. And so we're going to continue to look at that and sort of be like, what do we think would be most useful for this day? And then we're also using it as maybe a touch point where they get they get like their city laptop and different things where they can start using things like that for their own sort of self-guided onboarding and different things. And then the following week, and I know I've talked to you all about these curriculum topics that we've prioritized for early onboarding. And so the week of December 9th, looking at government fundamentals. So that's a lot of sessions with like the city attorney's office, just, learning about, state rules, about public meetings, like public records law, all different conflicts of interest, like learning those things you really need to know if you're going to be in elected office, really like helping set them up for success. And so they don't get in trouble unknowingly and different things like that. And I know I'm missing on some like other crucial things for government fundamentals. Like we'll be touching on sort of like the city organization and service areas and what the city does and different things like that as well. And then the following week, actually, I think we'll maybe even start on council operations and procedures towards the end of that week, potentially, just because the swearing in ceremony is planned for like Thursday of the following week. And I think the council operations and procedures sessions are just going to be so important and so rich with information, because I think that's also where we'll be talking about the legislative process. And I just think everything that's going to be built into those sessions is just going to be so important. And I think another key thing to highlight for this is we're sharing these plans with our partners, because it's going to be really important to have like the council clerk involved in this, really key folks that these electeds are going to be working with, like getting them to be able to start building relationships and know who they are and understand their roles as well will be really important. I hate hearing myself talk so much. Okay, I'm almost done. And then we're doing the public swearing-in ceremony on planning for December 19th now. It used to be later, and we got feedback that people were like, give us a break at least in between the Christmas and New Year's. And so we've sort of moved that up to the Thursday before the Christmas holiday. Of course, it won't be effective until January 1st. But that event itself is something that we think would just be a really great sort of moment to be like, we have our newly elected officials, we're making this transition, and making it be able to be something that's public would be really great. I will say, I just, before you talk about these to your partners, I think for various reasons, it will have to be a ticketed event. And so it's not like it's going to be open to anyone in the public. And so we need to figure out what that looks like to make it still something that's really accessible. And it could be that it's something that is recorded and everything, but we still need to work out those details. Yeah, and then January 2nd is their first meeting, and that's when they will elect the council president and vice president, which is why that council operations and procedures, those sessions are so important. So they know what to do when they meet on January 2nd. And then we're also working with our Unified Comms and 311 colleagues to, I don't know if it's going to be as big as a fair, but on January 3rd, sort of having them available in the Portland building for the counselors to kind of go around by district, and of course the mayor and the mayor's office will as well, to really understand, these are existing sort of communications and constituent relation tools that are available to you to help you do your work, help you be successful. And then finally, we're also working on just thinking about the first 3 to 6 months of the year and what sorts of work sessions and tours and key meetings we need to start preparing for, to help really focus the new electeds on what they need to be focused on, mostly the budget and different things like that, and giving them sort of the education and tools they need to do their job as well. Any questions on that?
Hey, quick question. So will the new council members start getting paid in the beginning of December?
Great question. So originally, the Bureau of Human Resources was like, don't start onboarding to January 1st. We're not paying them until January 2nd, until 2025. And so we shouldn't expect them to do onboarding before then. Because in the past, elected officials have never been paid before they take office, from what I know. In the past, sometimes staff have been paid to support them but HR really wanted to get away from that. But as we sort of discussed the importance of starting in December and different options, we settled on volunteer stipends. And so they'll have optional stipends that they can choose to get. They're all, another compromise with having them start in December was signing sort of like a waiver, because they will be receiving some sensitive information and different things like that before they're in office. And so our colleagues in City Attorney's Office and BHR have already developed a draft of that waiver, and we budgeted for the voluntary stipends. I think the stipends are max like $400, but it gives them something to have.
I asked, so the ones that say week of, are they like a few hours in the evening? I say that, I ask because the accessibility issue, right? We always expect our elected officials to be rich people, and that's what we're trying to get away from. So some non-rich people can't afford to take a month off work.
Exactly. So you were bringing up a great point. My colleague Jamie Duhamel brought this up really early on. And so that's why we're planning for, that Saturday session. We're also planning for most of these to be evening sessions to provide that option. I've heard other people have been like, oh, wait, no, I think these people are going to want to just get started and they might not want to do evenings. And it's like, oh, I mean, how do we know? And so we're kind of planning for flexibility, but assuming they're going to mostly be evening and Saturday sessions. It might just be that one Saturday. It might be mostly evenings just because we know we're coming up to the holiday. Yeah. But we also are trying to, as much as we want to encourage in-person attendance, trying to provide some flexibility with hybrid options as well.
Well, I do appreciate that there's been a lot of thought, and we all love Jamie, and there's another reason why. But because both things don't have to be mutually exclusive. They probably want to get started, but some people may not be able to because they have to work.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate that you guys are thinking of ways to mitigate that if there are a few. But like Amy mentioned in the chat, them having this timeline and this could help some of them prepare.
Yeah,
For a month off
absolutely.
if they had to. Because if you told them now, that may be a whole different story as if they find out in November.
Yes, yes, totally. And I end my presentation for the candidate learning sessions with actual calendars showing some of these thoughts and ideas, so they can start to think about that. And of course, we'll share more as we have more. Terry.
Yeah, it occurred to me that this is a pretty decent schedule, but are you prepared for the flip side of it? Is some of these electeds are going to want to get going early. They're going to want to introduce legislation in advance of the first meeting. I mean, if I were a new elected, I'd say I want to hit the ground running. I want to show constituents that I'm ready to go. I have these priorities I've been campaigning on for 6 months, 12 months. I have a bill in my pocket. Is there going to be a way to respond to that sort of enthusiasm? Because I think you're going to see it, and I think it's good. But is there a way to prepare for that?
Yeah, it's a great commentary, and I've heard comments like that. This is not my only answer, but I will say in November we are assuming, and I mean, Mike Jordan has shared this. Mike Jordan has said, I'll be calling the mayor as soon as I know who it is, to reach out to them and start building that relationship, and also help connect them to whatever resources they need or help get their questions answered. Luckily, we're also going to have a council operations manager, well, assuming council is going to approve that classification that we took to council today. But assuming that gets approved by council and that position gets set up, we have funding to hire that early or late summer, early fall. And so we want to get that role in here to get them familiar with all the work we've done. They might come in and want to make tweaks and changes, and that's fine. They need to come in and be able to own that work. And they're going to be in November, I would say, as the counselor elects become available, they can reach out to them and start building that relationship early. I would say also the council operations manager role is meant to be a bit of a resource to the counselors that come in and are like, these are my policy priorities. I want to move this forward. I want to do these things. That council operations manager can help them understand the legislative process and the best way to go about things like that. So I think that will be a key person for them to connect with in that sense. Of course, we're never going to be as prepared as we can or should be. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a few comments that I'll just send you about the timeline. It looks great to me. I really want to underscore what you said about the council operations manager. That person is going to be their new best friend, and it seems really, really important to get that person on board as soon as possible and give them as much training, resources, networking. I mean, really have them as well prepared as possible on the day after election day, because as Terry points out, some people are going to know that they're elected sooner rather than later, and they're going to want to get started immediately, and it'd be really good for them to have somebody to talk to that day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're hoping that they're prepared to do that work in advance of the election, so they'll be over prepared. I'm really excited for that role to be hired. It's just going to be great for all of us.
Yep.
All right. Well, then I think that sort of covers sort of like, okay, these are the key dates impacting the onboarding itself. But then it's like, what are all the deliverables that we're working on to get ready for that? And so I told you all, I've completed a draft of the onboarding plan, and it's going through internal reviews, and it'll be great to share that with you in advance of our next meeting. and it will build off, you know, I've copied and pasted these things from the onboarding plan, so we'll have that kind of information in it. And the reason I say it's going to be draft for a while is just because I know we're going to be picking up all these rocks and uncovering new things all the time. And I want it to be able to be a bit of a working draft and be a little flexible, especially because we really want different components of the organization to also really be able to own their pieces of this as well. And so want to keep things flexible so that they can, you know, make whatever tweaks they need to that are most appropriate for their work. So the general, I used to call this the council briefing booklet, but I think it's right to call it kind of the general elected officials briefing booklet. It's kind of information that's helpful for all of them to have. And in the past, that has been an internal document because it's had sensitive information and different things like that. And that might be true for like some of the mayoral briefing materials now, but internally we acknowledged it would be really great to have this be a public facing document, and just for transparency, but also for kind of civic education and help, you know, everyone, all Portlanders or anyone that's interested in this to really, you know, understand this great change we're going through, and understand how the city works, and that we have these new counselors that are really there to connect with them.
Thank you, Tate. And the meeting does end in 3 minutes. So if anyone has any questions about this, we can ask now, or we can send them, if you come up with questions, we can send them over to Tate.
Mm-hmm.
So when do you want the things that you requested? Like, what's the timeline for needing that kind of?
Do you mean like
research?
the things I bolded for you to work
Yeah,
on?
yeah. So we
Oh.
can divide them up amongst ourselves and then just help do the thing.
You work so much more quickly, I feel like, when I ask for things internally. No offense, everyone's busy. I mean, honestly, I see these as, I don't see you as like needing to have these done by next meeting. I see you as like taking this away and thinking about it and thinking about how you want to approach this work. And maybe at the next meeting you can share about, like, you know, who wants to do what the best way, and what you think is a reasonable timeline to deliver on these. Because I think, as you can see, you know, as long as like the information is provided to start to integrate into these materials based on their timelines, I think that would be what is appropriate. So if you know, I think you could align with sort of like the draft plan dates to provide like, these are our recommendations, and then that allows them to be integrated. And if you have them ready sooner, that works too.
Julia, can I ask a favor of you, like an admin favor? Can you just like write out like those, like in a table, like the tasks that we're supposed to do, and then like a space where we could just sign up to do them or something?
I see you nodding.
Okay.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for doing all the things.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else, just feel free to send it on to Tate. Next
Yeah.
slide, please. And as always, the recording of the meeting will be posted on the committee's website and is available after the meeting ends on the Office of Management and Finance YouTube channel. The next full GTAC meeting is June 11th. The Voter Education Subcommittee meeting will meet the week of June 24th. Our next meeting will be the week of June 17th, when we will review the onboarding plan. And Julia sent a doodle poll out last week. Make sure you fill that out. If you haven't, please do it by the end of the day today so we can schedule our next meeting. Next slide, please. And I want to thank everyone for your participation today. And with that, we're adjourned at exactly 5.